My name is Kara Williams, and at 68 years old, I never expected to be fighting for the $77 million business empire my husband Frank and I built over 40 years. When Frank passed our daughter-in-law, Amanda told me the money stays in the direct bloodline. At the will reading, she sat with a smug smile, certain I would walk away with nothing. Then the lawyer put down his papers and laughed. Before I share how my life turned upside down, let me know where you are watching from today and hit that subscribe button if you have ever had someone underestimate you. I grew up in a small Midwest town called Oak Ridge, where everybody knew everybody. My father worked at the local factory, and my mother was a seamstress. We lived modestly but never considered ourselves poor. I learned the value of hard work early, helping my mother with her sewing business after school and on weekends. By 16, I was saving every penny for college, determined to build something bigger than what Oak Ridge could offer. I met Frank Williams during my second year at Westlake Community College. We were both working students taking night classes. Frank worked construction during the day while studying business, and I waitressed at a local diner while pursuing accounting. Our first conversation happened in the campus library, when he asked to borrow my economics textbook. There was something honest in his blue eyes, a determination that matched my own. Our first date was at a simple coffee shop, where we spent hours talking about our dreams. Frank spoke passionately about starting his own construction company someday. Unlike other boys who talked big with nothing to back it up, Frank had a detailed plan. I shared my dream of running a business using my accounting skills for something meaningful. By the end of that evening, we both knew we had found something special. After dating for 2 years, Frank proposed with a tiny diamond ring he had saved 6 months to buy. We married in a small ceremony at my parents' backyard with just family and close friends. Our honeymoon was a weekend trip to Lake Michigan because we were saving every dollar for our future business. Our first home was a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. The ceilings leaked when it rained, and the heating worked only half the time, but it was ours. During the day, Frank worked for a local builder while I got a job as a bookkeeper at an accounting firm. At night, we spread papers across our kitchen table, planning our business, calculating costs, and dreaming big. Getting our first business loan was harder than we expected. 7 banks rejected us before First National gave us a chance. The loan officer, Mr. Thompson, later told us he approved it because of the detailed 5-year plan I had prepared and the passion in Frank's eyes when he talked about quality construction. That $30,000 loan changed our lives forever. Our first project was renovating a small office building downtown. Frank hired 2 workers and did most of the labor himself. I handled the books, ordered supplies, and even helped paint on weekends. We finished on time and under budget, which impressed the building owner so much that he recommended us to his business associates. That first successful project led to 3 more, and suddenly Williams Construction was officially in business. The early years were challenging but exhilarating. We reinvested almost every penny of profit back into the company. For 5 years, we lived as frugally as college students while our business grew. Frank had an incredible eye for potential properties and building designs, while I developed systems to keep our operations efficient and profitable. We were true partners in every sense. By our 10th anniversary, Williams Construction had grown to 50 employees. We had expanded from simple renovations to building custom homes and small commercial properties. We finally bought our first real house, a modest 3-bedroom colonial that felt like a mansion after our tiny apartment. I remember the night we moved in. Frank carried me across the threshold and whispered, "We did it, Kara. This is just the beginning." Frank was right. Over the next 30 years, Williams Construction grew into Williams Development Group, a $77 million company with projects across 12 states. We specialized in mixed-use developments that revitalized struggling downtown areas. Our company became known for quality construction, innovative designs, and community-minded development. I was so proud of what we built together. Having children proved more difficult than building our business. We tried for years with no success, facing the heartbreak of 2 miscarriages. When I turned 42, we had almost given up hope when I discovered I was pregnant. Our son Patrick was our miracle baby, arriving after nearly 20 years of marriage. Frank wept when he held Patrick for the first time, this tough construction man completely undone by our tiny son. Despite our busy professional lives, we were determined to be present parents for Patrick. Frank adjusted company meetings around school events, and I worked from home whenever Patrick was sick. We wanted him to have normal childhood, despite our growing wealth. We taught him the value of hard work and never handed him anything he had not earned. As Patrick grew, Frank took him to construction sites on weekends, teaching him the business from the ground up. By 12, Patrick could read blueprints. By 16, he worked summer jobs in different departments of our company. We hoped he would develop the same passion for the business that we had, that someday he would take over the company we had built with so much love and sacrifice. What we did not realize then was how different Patrick's path would be from what we imagined, and how one day our family legacy would be threatened by someone we welcomed into our lives with open arms. Patrick was always brilliant, with a mind for numbers that impressed even my accountant brain. When he graduated high school at the top of his class, Frank and I were bursting with pride. We had saved for his education since the day he was born, and now he had his pick of prestigious universities. He chose Wharton School of Business on the East Coast, wanting to bring modern business theories back to our family company. Those 4 years changed Patrick in ways we did not anticipate. He came home for holidays with designer clothes and new mannerisms. He talked about investment banking and venture capital instead of construction and development. Frank was concerned, but I reminded him that Patrick needed to find his own path, even if it diverged from ours temporarily. After graduating with his MBA, Patrick returned home. Frank offered him a position as project manager to learn the operational side of the business, but Patrick had other ideas. He wanted to create an investment division within Williams' development group. After some debate, Frank agreed to let him try, giving him a small portion of company funds to manage. I was proud of Frank for adapting his vision to include Patrick's ideas. 6 months after Patrick returned home, he called excitedly about a charity gala he had attended. He could not stop talking about a woman he had met named Amanda Sinclair. According to Patrick, she was beautiful, sophisticated, and worked in luxury real estate. He was clearly smitten. Frank and I were happy he had found someone special and invited them both to dinner the following weekend. I will never forget the first time Amanda walked into our home. She was stunning, with sleek blonde hair, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car. She air-kissed my cheeks and commented on our home being so quaint and charming, words that sounded complimentary but somehow felt like criticism. Still, she made Patrick beam with happiness, so I pushed aside my reservations. Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend trips to New York City, and social events. I barely recognized my down-to-earth son in this new lifestyle. When Patrick announced their engagement after just 4 months of dating, Frank pulled me aside with concern in his eyes. "Isn't this too fast?" he asked. But, looking at Patrick's joyful face, neither of us had the heart to question his decision. The wedding was an extravagant affair at the Grand Plaza Hotel with 400 guests, many of whom we had never met. Amanda's parents divorced and remarried to wealthy partners, competed to outdo each other with lavish gifts. Frank and I felt out of place despite being the parents of the groom and paying for half the wedding. I overheard one of Amanda's friends refer to us as the construction people, as if our life work was something to sneer at. Despite these undercurrents, I was determined to welcome Amanda into our family with open arms. I invited her for lunch, offered to share family recipes, and suggested shopping trips to get to know each other better. She always had an excuse: a charity committee, meeting, a yoga class, brunch with friends from college. Each rejection stung, but I told myself she was just adjusting to married life. The newlyweds moved into a luxury condo downtown that Frank and I helped purchase as a wedding gift. Amanda immediately hired a decorator and spent thousands reimagining the space. When we visited for dinner, Amanda gave us a tour, pointing out Italian marble countertops and custom furniture pieces that cost more than some people's homes. Patrick looked uncomfortable but said nothing, as she detailed each extravagant purchase. During family gatherings, Amanda would make subtle comments about my outdated fashion sense or our traditional holiday dishes. She tried to change our Thanksgiving menu to include exotic foods none of us had heard of. When I made my mother's famous apple pie, Amanda took one bite and asked if I had considered using organic apples and less sugar. Each comment felt like a tiny paper cut, insignificant alone but painful when accumulated. Frank was more direct in his concerns. After Sunday dinner 6 months into their marriage, he confided, "Something feels off with her, Kara. She seems more interested in what we have than who we are." I defended Amanda, suggesting she came from a different background and was still finding her place in our family. In truth, I was already noticing how she encouraged Patrick to work less and spend more. Patrick's behavior began to change under Amanda's influence. He missed family birthdays for social events with Amanda's friends. He stopped visiting construction sites with his father. When Frank tried to discuss business succession planning, Patrick would change the subject or take calls in the middle of conversations. Each small rejection broke a piece of Frank's heart, though he never complained. The Christmas before Frank got sick was particularly difficult. We had always spent Christmas Eve at our home, but Amanda insisted they attend her friend's winter gala instead. They arrived late on Christmas morning, stayed barely 2 hours, then left for her parents' vacation home in Aspen. As we watched them drive away, Frank squeezed my hand and said quietly, "We're losing him, Kara." Amanda began suggesting Patrick deserved a bigger role in the company despite his limited experience. She would casually mention at dinner how Patrick should be made executive vice president or given control of larger projects. When Frank gently explained that such positions were earned through experience, Amanda would smile tightly and change the subject. What troubled me most was how Patrick seemed to be adopting Amanda's materialistic values. The son we raised to understand the value of hard work now complained about his generous salary being insufficient for their lifestyle. The young man who once spent weekends helping at community building projects now played golf at exclusive country clubs. I barely recognized the kind, grounded boy we had raised. Despite these tensions, Frank and I never stopped trying to maintain our family bonds. We continued our Sunday dinners, celebrated holidays, and supported Patrick in his work at the company. We hoped that with time, Amanda would soften, and Patrick would remember the values we had taught him. We could not have imagined then how our family dynamics would be completely upended by what came next. The day Frank was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer started like any other Tuesday. He had mentioned some back pain and indigestion over the previous weeks, but we both dismissed it as normal aging. When his skin developed a yellowish tint, I insisted he see our doctor. We expected gallstones or something equally manageable. Instead, we sat in stunned silence as Dr. Miller explained that Frank had stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already spread to his liver. The drive home from the hospital was silent. Frank stared out the window while I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When we pulled into our driveway, Frank turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I am not afraid of dying, Kara," he said. "I am afraid of leaving you alone." I promised him he would never be alone as long as I had breath in my body. We told Patrick that evening. He sat on our living room couch, the same one where we had read him bedtime stories as a child, and broke down crying. Amanda sat beside him, patting his shoulder but looking uncomfortable with the display of emotion. When I explained that the prognosis was 6 months at best, Amanda asked about treatment options in a detached way that felt more appropriate for discussing a business proposal than her father-in-law's life. The next few weeks were a blur of oncologist appointments, second opinions, and difficult decisions. Frank decided against aggressive chemotherapy that would only extend his life by weeks while making him miserable. Instead, he chose palliative care to manage his symptoms and focused on spending his remaining time meaningfully. It was the bravest decision I had ever seen him make. I became Frank's primary caregiver, administering medications, preparing special meals he could tolerate, and helping him manage increasing pain. Our bedroom became a medical space with a hospital bed and equipment, but I still slept beside him every night, holding his hand as his body grew thinner and weaker. Those quiet nights, whispering memories and reassurances in the darkness, became precious beyond measure. Patrick visited once a week, usually for less than an hour. He always had excuses about work commitments or prior engagements. Each time he left, Frank would watch the door with such longing it broke my heart. I never complained to Patrick about his absences, not wanting to add guilt to his grief, but I hoped he would recognize on his own how little time remained with his father. Amanda rarely accompanied Patrick on these visits. When she did, she would sit awkwardly in the corner of the room, checking her phone and making little attempt at conversation. Once, when Frank was having a good day and reminiscing about building the business, Amanda suddenly showed interest. "What plans do you have for the company, Frank?" she asked, her voice unusually animated. Frank changed the subject, asking about her parents instead. About 2 months after the diagnosis, I noticed unusual activity. Frank began having private meetings with Thomas Hartwell, his longtime friend and our company's attorney. When I asked about these meetings, Frank kissed my forehead and said, "Just making sure everything is taken care of, my love. Nothing for you to worry about." I trusted Frank completely and did not press for details, though I wondered what he was planning. Family dinners became increasingly tense. One Sunday, Amanda brought up estate planning during dessert. "Frank, have you updated your will recently?" she asked while cutting her pie into tiny pieces she did not eat. The sudden silence around the table was deafening. Frank looked at her steadily and replied, "My affairs are in order, Amanda." Then he turned to Patrick and asked about a baseball game, effectively ending the discussion. A few days later, I overheard Amanda on the phone in our kitchen while she thought I was upstairs with Frank. "Of course the house will be ours," she was saying. "Patrick is the only child. Kara has no claim to the business assets since she was just the wife." My blood ran cold at her words, but I said nothing to Frank, not wanting to add to his burdens. As Frank's health declined further, he became more reflective. He would hold my hand for hours, talking about our life together. "Remember our first apartment?" he asked one evening. "I thought you would leave when the ceiling leaked on our bed during that thunderstorm, but you just laughed and helped me move it. I knew then you were the strongest woman I would ever know." During his final weeks, Frank asked me to bring him important business documents and photographs from throughout our marriage. He spent hours looking through them, sometimes asking me to read certain sections aloud. I did not understand why these papers suddenly mattered so much, but I honored every request, grateful for any moments of engagement, as he withdrew further into himself. 3 days before he died, Frank had a moment of unusual clarity and energy. He took my hand and made me promise something. "Kara, when the time comes, I need you to be strong. Stronger than you have ever been. Can you promise me that?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Frank smiled and said, "They will underestimate you. Let them." I did not fully understand his words then, but I would remember them vividly in the months to come. Frank passed peacefully in his sleep on a Thursday morning in April. I had been holding his hand all night, talking softly about our favorite memories. Somehow, I knew when he took his last breath, even before the monitors confirmed it. I sat with him for 2 more hours, my head on his chest, saying goodbye to the love of my life, my partner in everything for 45 years. Patrick and Amanda arrived at the house 3 hours after I called with the news. Patrick was genuinely distraught, but Amanda seemed more concerned with practical matters. She immediately began making phone calls about funeral arrangements, while Patrick sat in stunned silence in his father's study. I was too numb with grief to notice how quickly Amanda was taking control of everything, a mistake I would soon regret. The days following Frank's death passed in a fog of grief. Amanda took charge of the funeral arrangements, dismissing my input at every turn. Frank had always said he wanted a simple service at our local church with donations to the community building program instead of flowers. Amanda insisted on an elaborate service at the Grand Plaza Hotel, with expensive floral arrangements and catering. When I tried to explain what Frank had wanted, Amanda patted my hand condescendingly. "Kara, this isn't about Frank anymore," she said. "This is about honoring the Williams name appropriately. The company has a certain image to maintain." I was too exhausted to fight, watching helplessly as Frank's final wishes were ignored. The funeral itself was a spectacle that would have made Frank uncomfortable. Business associates he barely knew gave speeches about his visionary leadership. Amanda wore an expensive black designer dress that looked more appropriate for a gala than a funeral. I sat in the front row in the simple black dress. Frank had always liked feeling like a stranger at my own husband's service. Patrick seemed torn between his grief and Amanda's expectations. He delivered a beautiful eulogy about his father that brought tears to every eye, showing glimpses of the thoughtful son I recognized. But immediately afterward, he deferred to Amanda on everything, standing silently beside her as she played the role of grieving daughter-in-law with theatrical precision. The real changes began the day after the funeral. I went to the company office to collect some of Frank's personal items and found Amanda sitting at his desk going through his files. She looked up, clearly annoyed by my presence. "Patrick and I are handling things now, Kara," she said. "There's no need for you to concern yourself with the business anymore." I was stunned into silence. This company had been my life for 45 years. I had done the accounting, helped secure financing, and made countless operational decisions alongside Frank. Yet Amanda was dismissing me, as if I had been nothing more than Frank's housekeeper. I left without the photographs I had come for, too shocked to argue. Over the next week, I noticed Patrick and Amanda having frequent meetings with board members and executives, without including me. When I called our CFO Michael to ask about a banking issue, he seemed uncomfortable and said Patrick had instructed him to direct all my questions to the estate attorney. I was being systematically cut out of the company I had helped build. The confrontation happened exactly 1 week after the funeral. I was in Frank's study looking through old photographs when Amanda walked in without knocking. She was dressed in a business suit, her expression coldly determined. "You should start packing, Kara," she said without preamble. "Patrick and I will be moving into the house next month." I stared at her in disbelief. "This is my home," I said. "Frank and I built this house together 30 years ago." Amanda smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Not anymore. The house and company belong to Patrick now. Frank's assets stay in the direct bloodline. You were just the wife." The cruelty of her words struck me like a physical blow. Just the wife. As if the 45 years I had spent building a life and business with Frank meant nothing. As if the love we shared and the company we grew from nothing were inconsequential because my name wasn't Williams by birth. I managed to maintain my composure until Amanda left, then collapsed into Frank's chair, sobbing. I called Patrick immediately, hoping my son would correct this terrible misunderstanding. He answered on the 6th ring, his voice distant and formal. When I explained what Amanda had said, he sighed heavily. "Mom, we need to be practical about the business succession. Dad would have wanted clear leadership." I felt like I was talking to a stranger, not the boy I had raised. In the following days, I received formal letters from the company's legal department requesting I return my office keys and company credit cards. My personal belongings from my office were delivered to the house in cardboard boxes. My email access was revoked. 45 years of work erased with clinical efficiency. Friends tried to help. My best friend Janet urged me to seek legal advice. "This doesn't sound right, Kara," she insisted. "Frank would never leave you vulnerable like this." But I was paralyzed by grief and shock, unable to imagine fighting my own son. Besides, Frank had promised everything was taken care of. I had to trust that promise even as evidence mounted that something was terribly wrong. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest part. Longtime friends from the company stopped calling, presumably instructed not to contact me. Business associates who had dined in my home for years suddenly became unavailable. Even our country club membership was transferred to Patrick's name, with my access revoked. Amanda was systematically erasing my presence from the life Frank and I had built. I began having anxiety attacks, waking in the night, convinced I would be forced from my home. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. Janet started coming over daily, bringing food I barely touched and offering support I could hardly process. The betrayal by my own son, encouraged by his wife, was a wound deeper than even Frank's death. One night, as I sat alone in the kitchen where Frank and I had shared thousands of meals, I remembered his final strange promise. "They will underestimate you. Let them." For the first time since his death, I felt a spark of something beyond grief. Frank had known something I didn't. He had prepared for this somehow. I just needed to figure out what he had done. The next morning, I found myself standing straighter, thinking clearer. Whatever game Amanda was playing, I was done being a passive participant. Frank had not built our life with someone weak. and I would not dishonor his memory by becoming so now. It was time to discover exactly what my husband had planned, and why he had seemed so certain I would be all right. 3 weeks after Frank's funeral, a formal-looking envelope arrived by courier. Inside was an invitation to the official reading of Francis James Williams' last will and testament, scheduled for the following Monday at the offices of Hartwell Legal. I ran my fingers over the embossed letterhead, remembering how Thomas Hartwell had been not just our attorney, but one of Frank's oldest friends. As I placed the invitation on the kitchen counter, my phone rang. It was Amanda, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I just wanted to let you know about the will reading," she said. "Though, honestly, you shouldn't bother coming. It will just be painful for everyone. The estate is quite straightforward according to the preliminary discussions Thomas had with Patrick." I thought of Frank's mysterious meetings with Thomas in his final months. Something felt wrong about Amanda's confidence. I kept my voice neutral as I responded. "Thank you for your concern, Amanda, but I will be attending. After all, I was Frank's wife for 45 years. There was a pause before she replied, "Suit yourself," and hung up. That evening, I decided to go through Frank's desk more thoroughly. I had avoided it since his death, finding it too painful to see his reading glasses still perched on top of papers, his fountain pen lying where he had last placed it. Now I methodically opened each drawer looking for anything that might explain his cryptic final messages. In the bottom drawer behind a stack of old notebooks, I found an envelope with my name written in Frank's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief note. "Kara, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Trust Thomas. He knows everything. Remember our first project together. That was the foundation of everything that followed. I love you always, Frank." I read the note multiple times trying to decipher its meaning. The reference to our first project seemed significant. I went to our bedroom and pulled out the memory box I kept in my closet. Inside were photographs, letters, and mementos from throughout our marriage. At the bottom was a faded photograph of Frank and me standing proudly in front of that first renovated office building downtown, arms around each other, covered in paint, but beaming with pride. I turned the photo over and noticed writing I'd forgotten about. Frank had scrawled, "The Williams Partnership begins the 12th of October 1978. A sudden realization made me sit heavily on the edge of the bed. Partnership. Not just in marriage, but in business. From the very beginning, Frank had considered us equal partners in everything we built. The next morning, I called Thomas Hartwell directly. His secretary put me through immediately. "Kara," he said warmly, "I've been hoping you'd call." There was so much I wanted to tell him about the past weeks, but I kept my questions focused. "Thomas, Amanda seems very confident about the outcome of the will reading. Should I be concerned?" There was a pause before Thomas replied carefully. "Frank made sure you'd be taken care of, Kara. That's all I can say until Monday. But I would strongly advise you to attend the reading." His tone conveyed more than his words, a reassurance that steadied my nerves. "Thank you, Thomas," I said. "I'll see you Monday." Over the weekend, I spent hours going through our home office, finding old business documents I'd filed away years ago. Operating agreements, incorporation papers, property deeds. In each one, I noticed something I had taken for granted at the time. Both our names were listed on everything. Frank Williams and Kara Williams partners. Not Frank Williams with Kara as an afterthought. Equal partners from the beginning. I also found photographs from throughout the years. Frank and me at groundbreaking ceremonies, both wearing hard hats. Frank and me accepting business awards together. Frank always introducing me as his partner, never just his wife. How had I forgotten these details in my grief? How had I allowed Amanda to make me doubt my place in the empire Frank and I built together? Sunday night, I stood before my closet, considering what to wear to the will reading. My hand passed over the black dress I'd worn to the funeral and settled instead on a deep blue suit Frank had always loved. I am done with mourning, I thought. Tomorrow is about honoring what Frank and I built together. As I laid out my clothes for the next day, I noticed the simple diamond wedding band Frank had placed on my finger 45 years earlier. I remembered his words as he slid it on. "This ring is small, but the promise it represents is bigger than anything we'll ever own." I will build an empire with you, Kara Williams. That night, for the first time since Frank's death, I slept soundly. In my dreams, Frank stood beside me, smiling that crooked smile I loved so much. "You've got this, Kara," he said. "You always did." I woke with the sunrise, feeling a strength and clarity I had thought lost forever. The morning of the will reading, Patrick called to offer me a ride to the attorney's office. His voice sounded strained, uncertain. I declined politely, preferring to drive myself. I needed these moments alone to prepare for whatever was coming. As I drove the familiar route downtown, I passed buildings. Frank and I had developed together physical reminders of our shared legacy. I arrived at Hartwell Legal 15 minutes early, parking my modest sedan beside Patrick's luxury SUV. I took a deep breath, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the broken widow of recent weeks. She was Kara Williams, co-founder of Williams Development Group, a woman who had helped build a $77 million company from nothing but hard work and determination. As I walked toward the building, I remembered Frank's final promise. "They will underestimate you. Let them." For the first time, I smiled at the thought. Amanda had definitely underestimated me. More importantly, she had underestimated Frank and the depths of our partnership. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the dignity Frank would have expected from his true partner in life and business. Thomas Hartwell's office occupied the entire top floor of a building Frank and I had developed 15 years earlier. The receptionist, Margaret, greeted me warmly and led me to the main conference room. The polished mahogany table gleamed under soft lighting, surrounded by leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline Frank and I had helped shape. Amanda and Patrick were already seated, both dressed expensively in somber colors. Amanda wore a black designer suit, with gold jewelry, her hair perfectly styled. She barely acknowledged my entrance, whispering something to Patrick that made him look uncomfortable. I noticed she had positioned herself at the head of the table, a spot traditionally reserved for the primary beneficiary. Several other people were present. Jean Frank's sister, Michael Cooper, our company's CFO, and Robert Chen, our operations director. They all nodded respectfully as I entered. Jean crossed the room to embrace me, whispering, "Frank would be proud of you, Kara." Her support strengthened my resolve. Thomas entered last, carrying a leather portfolio and several file folders. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Frank and Thomas had been friends since college, their bond extending far beyond the professional relationship of client and attorney. "Good morning, everyone," Thomas began. "We are here for the reading of Francis James Williams' last will and testament." He looked directly at me with a gentle smile before continuing. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge Kara Williams, Frank's wife and partner of 45 years. Frank spoke of you with such love and admiration, Kara." Amanda shifted impatiently in her chair. "Thomas, we all loved Frank," she said with practiced sincerity. "But perhaps we could proceed with the reading. Some of us have other commitments today." The statement was clearly meant to hurry the proceedings, but Thomas appeared unruffled. "Of course, Amanda." Thomas opened his portfolio and removed a thick document. "We will begin with the standard legal declarations and smaller bequests." He read through several pages of legal terminology detailing small inheritances to longtime employees' donations to charities Frank had supported and a generous gift to Frank's sister Jean. Throughout this preliminary reading, Amanda grew increasingly restless, checking her watch and exchanging glances with Patrick. I remained still, hands folded in my lap, remembering Frank's words, "Trust Thomas. He knows everything." Now we come to the disposition of Williams Development Group and associated assets. Thomas continued, looking up from the document. Amanda straightened in her chair, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I noticed Patrick would not meet my eyes, staring instead at his hands clasped tightly on the table. Thomas cleared his throat and began reading. "Regarding Williams Development Group, the company I co-founded with my beloved wife, Kara Williams, on October 12, 1978, I hereby confirm the existing ownership structure as follows. 60% ownership is held by Kara Williams, my wife and business partner from day one. 30% ownership is held in trust for my son Patrick Williams to be fully transferred to him upon completion of 5 years working directly under Kara's leadership as CEO. The silence in the room was absolute. Amanda's face froze in shock, her mouth slightly open. Patrick looked up, confusion evident in his expression. I sat perfectly still, processing the information. Frank had restructured the company ownership years ago, ensuring I retained controlling interest while still providing for our son. Thomas continued without pause. The remaining 10% of company shares are distributed among the employee profit-sharing program established in 2005. Thomas looked up at Amanda, whose face had drained of color. This ownership structure was legally established 7 years ago and has been the operating reality of Williams Development Group since that time. The documentation is included in Appendix A. Amanda found her voice, though it shook with barely controlled anger. This can't be right. Frank built that company. Kara was just supporting him. She was never an equal partner. Thomas raised an eyebrow at her outburst, but remained professional. Actually, Amanda, the original incorporation documents from 1978 list Frank and Kara as co-founders and equal partners. Frank later transferred an additional 10% to Kara, recognizing her contributions to the company's growth. As Amanda sputtered in disbelief, Thomas turned to the next section. Regarding real estate holdings, the family residence at 720 Lakeview Drive remains the sole property of Kara Williams, as it has been since 2010, when Frank transferred full ownership to her as an anniversary gift. Patrick showed no surprise at this, suggesting he had been aware of at least some of these arrangements. Thomas continued methodically through the will, detailing various investments, retirement accounts, and personal property. The pattern was clear. Frank had spent years carefully arranging his affairs to ensure I would be secure and that our son would benefit while still having to earn his full inheritance. The $10 million life insurance policy would be divided with 70% to me and 30% to Patrick. As Thomas reached the final pages, something unexpected happened. He began to laugh softly, shaking his head as he read a private note from Frank. I apologize, he said, composing himself. Frank included a personal message here that caught me by surprise. With your permission, Kara, I'd like to read it aloud. I nodded, curious about what Frank had written that could make Thomas laugh during such a solemn occasion. Thomas adjusted his glasses and read, To my wife, Kara, the true brains behind Williams Development Group all these years, if Amanda is sitting there believing she has somehow outmaneuvered you, please enjoy the moment when she realizes who really built our empire. And to my son, I love you enough to protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Trust your mother. She knows this business better than anyone, including me. Amanda stood abruptly, her face contorted with fury. This is ridiculous, she shouted. Well, contest this will. Frank wasn't in his right mind when he made these arrangements. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, seeking allies and finding none. Thomas calmly removed another document from his portfolio. Frank anticipated this reaction, Amanda. This video was recorded 6 months ago, well before his illness affected his cognitive abilities. 3 independent physicians certified his mental competence at the time of recording. Thomas nodded to his assistant, who dimmed the lights and started a projection on the wall. Frank's face appeared on the screen, healthy and clear-eyed. He sat in his office, looking directly into the camera. If you're watching this, he began. Then the will has been read, and some people might be questioning my decisions. He smiled, his familiar, crooked smile. I want to speak directly to my family and explain my choices. Frank spoke for nearly 10 minutes, detailing how he had built the company with me as an equal partner from day one. He explained that Head noticed disturbing patterns in Patrick's relationship with Amanda and had become concerned about her influence over business decisions. Frank stated clearly that his arrangements were made with full mental capacity and after extensive consideration. The most powerful moment came when Frank addressed Amanda directly. I know you've been telling people that Kara was just my wife, not my business partner. The truth is, Kara built this company as much as I did. She managed our finances, secured our loans, and made key operational decisions throughout our 45-year partnership. Without her, there would be no Williams Development Group. By the time the video ended, Amanda was rigid with anger. Thomas turned on the lights and calmly continued. Frank made these arrangements legally binding and contest-proof. He also added a no-contest clause, meaning anyone who challenges this will forfeit their entire inheritance. His eyes met Amanda's steadily. I would strongly advise against litigation, Amanda. But what about me? Amanda demanded, her voice shrill. Where is my share? Thomas replied evenly. Frank made no specific provisions for you, Amanda. Any assets Patrick receives are his alone, and protected by the prenuptial agreement you signed before your marriage. That agreement, which you willingly entered into, specifically states that inherited assets remain the sole property of the inheriting spouse. Amanda turned to Patrick, clearly expecting him to object on her behalf. Patrick looked torn, glancing between his mother and his wife. I could see the moment he made his decision. His shoulders straightened as he turned to Amanda. We need to accept this, Amanda. Dad knew what he was doing. As the full reality of the situation sank in, Amanda grabbed her designer purse and stormed toward the door. This isn't over, she hissed as she passed my chair. But we both knew it was. Frank had outmaneuvered her, completely protecting both the company we built and our son's future with meticulous legal precision. After Amanda left, Thomas completed the reading of the will. When he finished, he looked at me with genuine admiration. Frank told me you were the strongest woman he had ever known, Kara. Now I understand why he was so confident you'd weather this storm. In that moment, I felt Frank's presence beside me, his hand symbolically on my shoulder, guiding me forward into this next chapter. After the will reading, the conference room emptied quickly, leaving just Patrick and me. He sat across the table, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. Mom, he said softly, I am so sorry. I had no idea Amanda was saying those things to you. His eyes were filled with genuine regret. I reached across the table and took his hand. She is your wife, Patrick. I understand loyalty to your spouse. What matters now is where we go from here. He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. Dad was right about everything, wasn't he? About the business, about Amanda, about you. Thomas returned with 2 cups of coffee, setting them before us. Frank came to me about 7 years ago, he explained, sitting beside me. He was concerned about Patrick's relationship with Amanda and wanted to protect both of you. The ownership restructuring, the transfers of property, it was all done legally and gradually to avoid raising suspicions. Patrick looked ashamed. All those meetings with Dad during his illness, I thought they were about giving me control of the company. Instead, he was trying to help me see what was happening with Amanda. My heart ached for my son, trapped between loyalty to his wife and the dawning realization of her true character. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Amanda filed for divorce 3 days after the will reading, clearly believing she could secure a substantial settlement despite the prenuptial agreement. When her lawyers reviewed the ironclad documents Frank had prepared, they advised her to accept the minimal terms outlined in the prenup. She left the marriage with essentially what she had brought into it, plus a small settlement Patrick insisted on providing. My first day walking into Williams Development Group as the official CEO was surreal. Employees lined the hallway applauding as I made my way to what had been Frank's office, our office now. Michael Cooper, our CFO, had arranged the welcome later, telling me that most of the staff had always seen me as the heart of the company anyway. The transition wasn't without challenges. Some board members, longtime friends of Frank, were hesitant about my leadership. I called a special meeting and laid out my vision for the company's future, emphasizing continuity while proposing innovative new directions. By the end of that 3-hour meeting, I had their unanimous support. Patrick initially struggled with his new role, working under my direct supervision. Years of Amanda's influence had convinced him he deserved an executive position without earning it. Our first month working together was tense, with Patrick challenging my decisions and resenting the oversight. Frank had anticipated this, leaving detailed notes with Thomas about how to handle this phase of Patrick's development. The turning point came during a major project review. Patrick had prepared a superficial analysis that missed critical financial risks. Rather than embarrassing him in front of the team, I asked everyone else to leave and then walked him through a proper assessment. We stayed until midnight, working side by side, like Frank and I used to do. By the time we finished, Patrick had a new appreciation for the depth of knowledge required to run our company. 6 months after the will reading, I established the Frank Williams Community Building Scholarship, providing education and apprenticeships in construction trades for underprivileged youth. It was exactly the kind of program Frank had always wanted to create, but never found the time to implement. At the inaugural ceremony, Patrick stood beside me, proudly announcing the company's commitment to maintaining the program in perpetuity. Healing my relationship with Patrick took time and patience. We began having weekly dinners, just the two of us, where we would talk about everything from company projects to memories of Frank. Gradually, I saw glimpses of the thoughtful, kind boy I had raised, emerging from behind the facade Amanda had helped construct. One evening, as we shared dessert at Frank's favorite restaurant, Patrick confessed something that broke my heart. "She told me you were trying to control the company out of spite," he said quietly. "That you were bitter about being just the wife all those years. Now I see how completely wrong that was. You and Dad were true partners in every sense." I squeezed his hand, fighting back tears. "Your father and I built everything together, Patrick. The business, our home, our family. That partnership was the greatest gift of my life. I want you to find that kind of partnership someday. Someone who builds with you, not someone who just wants what you've built." A year after Frank's death, Patrick met Sarah, a civil engineer, who worked for a firm that often partnered with Williams Development Group. Unlike Amanda, Sarah was unpretentious and genuinely interested in the work itself. The first time she came to dinner at my house, she asked thoughtful questions about the company's history and spent an hour looking through photo albums of our early projects. Watching Patrick with someone who appreciated our family's true values was healing for both of us. 2 years after the will, reading Williams Development Group had grown to a $100 million company under my leadership. We expanded into sustainable development projects that Frank had been exploring before his illness. Patrick had developed into a capable executive, earning the respect of the board and employees through hard work rather than entitlement. Amanda occasionally appeared in social media posts from mutual acquaintances, always in designer clothes at exclusive events. According to industry gossip, she had married a wealthy older man in real estate development. I felt no anger toward her anymore, just a distant sadness for someone who valued possessions over genuine connection. On the 3rd anniversary of Frank's death, I visited his grave alone, bringing his favorite white roses. I sat beside the headstone, telling him about the company's successes, Patrick's growth, and my own journey. I like to think he heard me, that he knows his careful planning protected everything we built together. The greatest lesson Frank taught me wasn't about business strategy or investment returns. It was about recognizing true partnership, the kind that builds something greater than either person could create alone. Frank and I had that partnership for 45 years, building a business, a family, and a legacy that would outlast us both. As I navigate this chapter of my life without Frank beside me, I carry his wisdom in my heart. He knew that true wealth isn't measured in millions, but in the wisdom to know who stands beside you when nothing else remains. I was blessed to have a partner who valued me enough to protect me even after he was gone. Have you ever had someone underestimate you only to be shocked when you revealed your true strength? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more journeys of love, loss, and triumph. Like and share with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, never underestimate a woman who helped build an empire regardless of what title she holds.